doesn't love the greatest common factor? Well, today we're going to learn how to factor out the greatest common factor from a polynomial. Alright, so we're going to start with a binomial. We're just going to go ahead and start easy. Alright, so we got 2x squared plus 2x. So if we're going to factor out the greatest common factor, we need to figure out what the greatest common factor is. So if we look at the factors of 2x squared, it will be 2 times x times x. The factors of 2x are just 2 and x. So you can see here I put a box around the greatest common factor. So I'm going to write the greatest common factor out front. So I'm going to go ahead and write 2x. Now, in order to know what should go inside of here, I'm going to divide both of them by the greatest common factor because I'm actually like taking the greatest common factor out of it. Okay, so it's like I'm undistributing in a way. So what I'm going to do is divide both of these. So 2 times x divided by 2x. All that's left is x. And 2x divided by 2x, all that's left is 1. Now you can double check that you did it correctly by multiplying it back together and see if you get what you started with. So 2x times x is 2x squared. 2x times 1 is 2x. So you can always check your answer. Alright. Let's try these. First we need to find the greatest common factor. So I can look and see this is 5 times x times x times x. Now, do I have a 5 here? Indeed I do. I could say this is 5 times 9 times x. So therefore, I could divide both of them by the greatest common factor, which in this case is going to be 5x. So step 2, divide each term by the greatest common factor. So the 5 and the x cancels out, so what is left? X squared. Alright, and I said I'm going to write my greatest common factor out front, so I can't forget to do that. And then if I divide by the 5 and the x, what is left but 9? And I keep the same sign that I had. Alright, now I can always check to make sure I did this correctly. 5x times x squared is 5x cubed. 5x times negative 9 is negative 45x. So I am correct. Alright, let's try one more. Probably you should pause here, see if you know how to do this, and then come back and listen. Or fast forward if you already get it. Okay, so on here, I see that I have 17. That's a prime number, so I only have 17 and 3 m's. Alright, maybe you're thinking, what is a factor of 51? Guess what is? 17. So, 3 times 17 times m times m. So I can see that my greatest common factor is actually 17m. So what is my GCF? 17m. And now I can divide both terms by that. That cancels. And that cancels. So now I write the greatest common factor out front. And what's left? M squared. Use the same sign, so plus. And then a 3m. I can always multiply back to check that I did it right. So 17m times m squared is 17m cubed. 17m times 3 is 51m squared. So I did do it correctly. And I forgot an m. I hope you guys caught that. I was just checking to see if you were paying attention. So the greatest common factor should have actually been 2 m's, which then would be 17m squared. So I would be just left with m plus 3. I hope you were paying attention and you caught that mistake. Alright, moving on. Let's try this with a trinomial. So look and see if you think that 3, 9, and 6 have a factor, and hopefully you realize that 3 is their greatest common factor. And And then x to the third, x squared, and x. What's the greatest common factor? We can only take out an x because there's not an x squared in all three of them. So I can take out a 3x. So now I'm going to divide each term by 3x. Alright, so I write the greatest common factor out front. And then I write what's left. 3 divided by 3 is 1. X squared. X cubed divided by x is x squared. 9 divided by 3 is 3. X squared divided by x, x. And then 6x divided by 3x is 2. Okay, and there is my answer. Okay, now, after I come up with an answer, I should look to see if I can factor this part. So in the next example, we're going to take it one step further and see if it can continue to be factored. So once I take out a greatest common factor, I'm going to then go back and see if this can be factored. Alright, so let's try it on this example. Go ahead and pause and factor out the greatest common factor, and then you can put it back for the next part. Okay, so now we're going to see if this can be factored. So if you remember, we have to, in order to factor this part, what we have to do, which you learned in the last video, is that I need to find factors of 12. Okay, so I need to find factors of 12, of negative 12, that add up to make x. Okay, so let's put over here some factors of 12. So 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. Okay, now, if they're going to multiply together and to make a negative 12, I know that one of these has to be positive and one has to be negative. And the sum of them needs to come up to 1 because this is a 1x. Alright, so remember what I'm going to do. Is there any way I could add 1 and 12 if I make one of those negative and get 1? No. Okay, what about if I make 2 and 6, I make one of those negative, can I get 1? No. Alright, if I make one of these negative, I can get 1. So that tells me I can go ahead and use this. So the negative 3 times 4 makes negative 12. I can check the outside term is 4x, and the inside term is negative 3x. So therefore that gives me a positive 1. And don't forget to bring down the greatest common factor that you took out from the beginning. That is my final answer. Alright, so I'm going to let you try it one more time by yourself. You can do it. Pause here. Alright, welcome back. So here we go. We see this. First we look for a greatest common factor and hopefully you found that you could take out a 3. So I have x squared. Alright, then I need to check if I can factor that. We know that if this comes out negative, I must be multiplying a positive and a negative. And they need to add together to make 4. So I make my factors of negative 21. So there's no way with 1 and 21 I can ever get a sum of 4. However, with 3 and 7, if I make this a negative 3 and a positive 7, that will give me 4. So I can go back and multiply and make sure that works. So I have x squared, negative 3x, positive 7x, that gives me 4x. 7 times negative 3 gives me 21. And then, of course, factor that 3 back in, and you'd be back at here. So that's your final answer. Success.